President Lee Jae-myung has pledged lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula as he vows dialogue over dispute with North Korea. With more on Press Perspective today. Welcome to Wednesday's edition of Press Perspective. It's June 11th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we address the new South Korean administration's potential policy for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. And for this, I have Cheon Soram, a former reporter with Radio Free Asia, here in the studio. Soram, welcome back.
Glad to be here again.
I also have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI with us. Thomas, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Soram, I was actually going to start by asking you about President Lee Jae-myung's remarks with regard to North Korea during his inauguration. But let's start off with news that we have just coming in. We've heard that South Korea has halted loudspeaker broadcasts into North Korea.
Yeah.
What's the latest?
So the leadership just stopped its louder speaker broadcast towards North Korea, which started last June. Lee Jae-myung had mentioned during his campaign that he would stop the broadcasts to help ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula. So I think he just fulfilled his promise.
Right, so it was a pledge that he made during his campaign trail then. All right then, let's now talk about President Lee Jae-myung's remarks during his inauguration speech with regard to North Korea and the broader implications of those remarks.
So President Lee Jae-myung made a powerful statement on North Korea during his inauguration. His message was clear. South Korea will stay strong, but it will also stay open for dialogue. He said South Korea will respond to North Korea's nuclear threat and military provocation with strong deterrence based on ROK and U.S. alliances. At the same time, South Korea will keep the door open for communication to build peace on the Korean Peninsula. That's what he said during the inauguration speech. And he stressed the importance of defense, and he also made it clear that diplomatic dialogues and reopening lines of communication are now top priorities for North Korean policy. That's a powerful line, and it gives us real insight into how the new president plans to handle relations with Pyongyang. On one hand, he's promising strong deterrence through South Korea alliance with United States, but on the other hand, he's signaling openness. This approach isn't entirely new, but it is significant. Previous leadership have often leaned more heavily on one side, either like military strength or engagement with North Korea. So Lee is trying to do that both. So that dual-track approach holds broader implications. It signals to Washington and Tokyo that Seoul remains firmly aligned with the security alliances, while also pointing to a shift in tone with Pyongyang. Lee is saying we are ready to defend, but also open to talk.
Right, and keeping in mind what Soram has just said, Thomas, what indeed are the prospects of, say, such a policy of engagement with North Korea under President Lee Jae-myung?
Well, I think you would have to say it's an uphill climb. I mean, just considering where the status of the relationship right now in North Korea has been very kind of adamantly against engaging with South Korea and has named South Korea as an enemy, has removed the idea of unification from its official policy. So, we're starting in a place where the relationship has been at a low point. And, I think to sort of follow on what Soram was saying, Lee Jae-myung is talking about kind of opening the door and wanting to restart engagement, but, he's still framing, like most of his campaign pledges in general, in this sort of a pragmatic way. And he has said he wants, some of the things he's promised while campaigning were to stop these loudspeaker broadcasts. He wants the sort of activist groups to stop sending the balloons with, pamphlets over the border. He said he wants to restore the 2018 Comprehensive Military Agreement that was signed during this last period of engagement with Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un, and that was meant to just be something that would bring the temperature down, stop sort of provocations at the this border area. So I think that's where he's starting now, is to try and just lower the temperature and keep things from, perhaps just inadvertently sparking something bigger. I mean, he's mentioned the phrase sort of peaceful coexistence. I don't think he's thinking, oh, tomorrow I'm going to have a summit. He's talked about it, this not seeming very likely at this point to meet with Kim Jong-un anytime soon. But I think the idea is, if we can maintain a sort of a baseline of more peaceful coexistence, that may at least lay the groundwork for starting some communications. He's also mentioned he wants to restart this hotline that has not been answered by Pyongyang since, I think, 2023. Again, North Korea has not really signaled some great interest in re-engaging. I think obviously the wild card is, where will the Trump administration maybe fit into this picture? I mean, Trump has at least hinted at that he wants to perhaps restart some kind of summit or negotiation with Kim Jong-un, and maybe Lee Jae-myung's administration could kind of help facilitate that and maybe keep things on track in a way, where the Trump administration, they obviously have many different things going on. So there's, you could see that as perhaps a door towards things. But, for now, I think it's keeping the prospects modest at this point. But, at least there's a goal for this to happen in the future.
Right. And now, with a liberal leader in power here in South Korea, talk about the so-called sunshine policy has been floating around quite a bit. For the sake of some context, Soram, let's begin with, or do remind us about the sunshine policy. What is it? Who started it? And what were some of its early gains?
So with a progressive leader now in power, talk of South Korea's sunshine policy is coming back into focus. The sunshine policy was launched in 1998 by President Kim Dae-jung. Its goal was simple: engage North Korea through dialogue and economic cooperation rather than confrontation. Kim believed that showing warmth, not the wind, could encourage Pyongyang to open up, and this idea even earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2000. Under the policy, South Korea sent massive humanitarian aid and even opened the Kaesong Industrial Park, where South Korean companies employed North Koreans. There were also historic summits: Kim Dae-jung's groundbreaking meeting with Kim Jong-il in 2000, the first ever between the leaders of two Koreas. Those early gains were real. Families separated by the Korean War were able to reunite, and my grandfather was one of them. And tourist visit to Gyeonggang began, and diplomatic tension eased. Now, Lee Jae-myung, a 61-year-old lawyer who just became president, comes from a political movement that's long associated with this approach. He represents the same progressive bloc that created the sunshine policy, that one that saw both progress and setbacks, but never quite a full breakthrough with the North. But now Lee's updating the playbook. While he talks about reopening lines of communication with North Korea, he also reinforcing military deterrence through U.S. ROK alliances. It's a more cautious version of sunshine, dialogue, yes, but tied to concrete actions like stopping military or missile launches. Still, it's important to remember the lessons of the past. The sunshine policy saw some early breakthroughs, but also drew criticism as North Korea advanced its weapons program.
Right. Soram, so your grandfather was part of the first inter-Korean family reunion meetings. I see. I remember how Arirang covered the first inter-Korean family reunions back in the year 2000. Right. Must have been a very emotional moment for your grandfather.
True. Yeah.
Right then, Thomas, do tell us a bit more about the sunshine policy under the previous progressive administrations.
Right, so it was continued after Kim Dae-jung. His successor was No Moo-hyun, who was from the same political party background. So he kept it going. I mean, there was obviously back and forth with, during that time, North Korea was engaged in the six-party talks, to wind down its nuclear ambitions, but they were found to have, reneged on promises during that whole period. So there was, definitely a back and forth, but Mu-hyun was determined to keep this going. And he continued. I think it was really during his presidency that the Kaesong industrial complex that Soram mentioned, really started to take off, and that it grew quite a lot during that period. And he also had a summit with Kim Jong-il in 2007. But by 2008, 2009, his successor was Lee Myung-bak, who was, from the more conservative wing and wanted to sort of pull back anyway from that. But then also North Korea around that time conducted a failed satellite launch, which was really considered to be an ICBM test, and a couple of nuclear tests in 2009. So really it sort of, and then they pulled out of the six-party talks. So that kind of scrapped the whole Sunshine Policy approach, and it stayed that way under Park Geun-hye, the following president. But then when Moon Jae-in came back to power in 2017, he wanted to revive Sunshine. Some people called it Moonshine policy, and that started again. And this is around the time I first came to Korea, and there was this, all this excitement and all this détente around the Pyeongchang Olympics when North Korea participated. And obviously Moon and Kim Jong-un had 3 summits, and then we saw Trump and Kim Jong-un. So there was a period in, this 2018, 2019 period where it really revived, and they signed this, military agreement, and there was some talk of, restarting new projects. They restarted the family reunion program briefly. And so, obviously we know how that kind of petered out, and, if you look at the pluses and minuses of it, I think it's, from this perspective, you can look back and say, well, look where we are now, and nothing, North Korea, we're as far apart as ever. North Korea has advanced its weapons program farther and farther than before. So the whole thing, I think there's one perspective that it was all, a failure, or that North Korea was never really a true, sincere partner. But at the same time, you can also look at, counterfactually what might have happened during some of those periods if there wasn't these periods of engagement. And, there obviously are these stories such as Soram's grandfather. People did get to engage with their family. So, there's positives from it, obviously. And then, perhaps there's groundwork that has been laid if it ever does revive. We already have some of these agreements you could try to restart or look back on, and some history of it. So, it's something that you can't say it was entirely a failure, perhaps, but certainly it wasn't the type of success that had been hoped, certainly. And, the circumstances now are so different, too. I think even the idea of unification, which was so strongly underlying the original, start of it, seems perhaps more and more distant than ever before.
Right. Soram, as Thomas just said, the circumstances right now, they are very different from a couple of years back. What do you suppose are the potential geopolitical hurdles that the Sunshine Policy under President Lee Jae-myung may face?
So as President Lee Jae-myung tries to bring back the Sunshine Policy, he faces a much more complicated situation compared to the past. Back then, the goal was to build trust with North Korea through dialogue and economic cooperation. But today, Pyongyang is a much different actor with a far more advanced nuclear program and deepening military ties with Russia. And this deepening partnership makes it less likely that Seoul's efforts alone can sway Pyongyang. Also, unlike the past, North Korea continues to reject talks both South Korea and the US. Despite Seoul's willingness to engage, Pyongyang remains closed off, keeping diplomatic channels largely closed. So the biggest hurdle is actually Pyongyang's own response. From a geopolitical standpoint, Lee's Sunshine Policy has to navigate a tricky balance. South Korea must maintain its strong alliance with the US and Japan while also reaching out to the North. But this balancing it can be a little bit tricky. However, one new factor could work in Lee's favor, President Donald Trump. Unlike previous US leadership, Trump has shown a willingness to engage directly with Kim Jong-un. His openness to talks might give Lee more political space to pursue sunshine policy. Still, Trump's foreign policy has been unpredictable, and his strategic goals may not align with Seoul's goals. In short, the path ahead is full of challenges. North Korea's more advanced nuclear facilities, nuclear capabilities, and its unwillingness to talk with South Korea and the US, and the complex regional alliances all make the sunshine policy a tough mission.
Right. As Soram just mentioned, Thomas, quite a number of scholars here in the country as well believe that North Korea's defense pact with Russia make it less inclined perhaps to speak or engage with South Korea and the US. And speaking of that, I believe you covered North Korea and Russia's reaffirming their commitment to their defense pact, right? Last week, I believe.
Yes, that was just last week. It was, a short piece, but Sergei Shoigu, who was the former defense minister, now he's like the Security Council secretary, was in Pyongyang, and they just did had a little meeting, and basically Kim Jong-un affirmed that North Korea would, stick by Russia to the end, sort of thing. And Shoigu pretty much thanked North Korea for sending troops there. And, as you mentioned, obviously Russia and North Korea have had this defense pact it's almost coming up on 1 year anniversary, actually, of them signing their military pact. It was June of last year. And, we know that they're sending artillery and weapons and troops. And I mean, North Korea has only admitted to the troops part of it, but that's something like 14,000 or 14 to 15,000, depending on who's reporting troops there. And, in exchange, Russia has been supplying, fuel and food, helping North Korea with these just its dire kind of, being cut off from the rest of the world, and also helping North Korea develop its weapons programs. I mean, there was a report from this monitoring team that was set up by by 11 different countries recently, talking about that Russia has already delivered mobile air defense systems to them and has helped them with some of their ballistic missile technology. There was just a report yesterday from Ukrainian intelligence that Russia is helping North Korea set up sites to manufacture Iranian kind of model drones, which are being used in the war in Ukraine and have had a lot of impact. So all that said, North Korea is not in the sort of position where it needs to be kind of coming on its knees, perhaps, to the negotiating table from a position of desperation or weakness. They are in a better, I wouldn't say probably a great position, economically or anything, but in a better place than they were with the aid that Russia has been supplying to them. And obviously they've developed their nuclear and weapons programs to a great extent. And this would be such a different situation than the 2018, sort of 2019 period with North Korea coming back. Their nuclear program has advanced to a great degree. Also, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Watchdog, reported earlier this week that North Korea appears to be starting a new uranium enrichment site in another location. So, they're very much in a position where they don't have perhaps the urgency to meet from a position of utter weakness. But I think, if you want to look a little bit bigger picture, how far is this relationship with Russia necessarily going to bring North Korea? Are they just kind of limping along? It's keeping perhaps the Kim regime in power and more stable, but, does Kim Jong-un still have dreams of making North Korea something bigger and better? We do see these, he's often touring new vacation, resort facilities or new developments in Pyongyang. So if he is envisioning North Korea becoming a more economically developed place, there is a space where eventually, you would want to see, can I get some sanctions relief? Can I engage with the broader world, not just rely 100% on Russia? That's also a relationship of, convenience for both. So maybe that's the bigger picture, but it certainly, North Korea is not desperate at this moment in the way they might have been in another time.
Thomas, speaking about North Korea's advances with regard to its weapons ambitions, what's the latest with regard to its failed warship launch?
Oh, that was been covered quite a fair bit in the last couple of weeks. There was an accident when it was this new Warship destroyer, 5,000-ton destroyer, capsized during its launch, had an accident in Cheongjin port area. And then in front of Kim Jong-un, which was seemed to really anger him, and he demanded that it be repaired before this party congress that's at the end of this month. And it seems that North Korea has actually managed to right the ship. Like last week, they announced that they had gotten it back upright, and there's been all this satellite footage that has kind of confirmed what they said. And then they've brought it over to the Rajin dockyard, I think it's called, and it's in Rason, which is an area that's right next to Russia and China, actually. So there's some sense of maybe this is another area Russia might be helping them with the repair. But they've gotten it over. They seem like they righted the ship just almost manually. There were people apparently like pulling from the shore. They don't have these big machines, pulling with rope, like cables and using balloons. And so I think it surprised some observers that they've managed to get it upright, and whether or not they can repair it fully or functionally, but it's gone farther, I think, than maybe people had at first guessed, and we'll see how much there was a belief that Russia was involved in the development of the weapons of this ship in the first place, so this could be another area where we're seeing Russia's help in the repair.
So there was a speculation, but it had yet to be confirmed, though.
There's speculation about Russia, because they launched another destroyer very similar to this about a month before, and people that were looking at the type of weapons technology thought that had to have come from Russia, some of the missiles and like radar systems. And so it's believed that this ship is very similar in that regard. So it's speculation whether Russia is going to help them repair it or not, but it's just people have noted, some analysts have noted that it's really like right next to kind of this corner where Russia and China meet. So there's a potential maybe Russia could help with certain things like sonar, kind of equipment that you don't believe North Korea necessarily had the technology to repair.
All this coming in return for, of course, U.S. North Korea troop deployment for Russia's cause in Ukraine, then?
Believed to be
right.
so, yeah.
All right, then. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thomas, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Soram, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, like I said, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow.